Now to do this thing, to think this through, we need to go to the economics of ecosystems. Because the key thing to notice here, ladies and gentlemen, is that nature is not just a luxury for the rich. Of course, we all enjoy nature when we go on our holidays and so on. But nature is also a necessity for the poor. They need nature because what they get from nature is free. They don't have money, they are poor, therefore they need nature. They consume from nature not because they have some malicious reason to destroy what they consume, but they consume because they have no choice. They consume because nature provides them all of the goods and services, not just the water, not just the fuel wood for their homes, for cooking, but also bushmeats, fisheries if they are coastal people. It provides straw and bamboo for their huts and homes. It provides wood for construction. It provides small marketable produce like honey and beeswax and lac and so on and so forth, which they can collect and sell. It unfortunately also provides a form of fuel, basically charcoal, which they can sell, but that of course destroys a lot of wood and is a cost. But nature is used by the poor because they need it. So recognizing that, you have to connect with the rationale for why conservation is important for the poor. Unfortunately, this doesn't come through. Now, we, in our TEEV study on the economics of ecosystems and biodiversity, we looked at 3 countries. We looked at Indonesia, India, and Brazil. And what we found was that these so-called ecosystem services, by that I mean the ability of the forest to collect water and recycle it, the ability of the forest to provide soil conservation and to provide all the bushmeat and stuff that the poor harvest from the forest. All of these things added up, in addition, of course, to cleaning of air, fresh water, and so on, providing water. So if we add up all those things and value them, even though they are invisible and they are not part of the GDP, if we estimate how much they would be, measured as against GDP, they tend to be between 10 and 20% if you just add them up. But that's of overall GDP. But that doesn't really look at the right numerator or the right denominator, because the question you should ask is, to whom did those benefits flow? And when you ask that question, you realize, well, who would suffer if the forests went, and whose cattle and goats could not pick leaf litter and feed from the forest? So you answer, poor farmer, of course. Whose crops would be washed away if there were floods as a result of the lack of forest cover? Oh, poor farmer. Whose wife would not be able to go to the forest and collect fuel wood for her cooking? A poor farmer again. So the more you ask who actually benefits from these and who's truly dependent on these, the answer is the poor rural communities. And of course the local fisher folks and those who directly depend on gathering fuel wood. So to say that, well, ecosystem services are only a small fraction of GDP, that doesn't mean much. The question you should be asking is, what are ecosystem services consumed by the poor as a fraction of the GDP of the poor? And when you do that calculation, then we model this for these same 3 countries, here's what we find. The answers are remarkably different. We are not talking about 10, 15, 20% anymore. We're talking about 47%, 89%, 75%. Basically, the poor, what we are saying is their consumption, the household consumption of the poor, is very strongly dependent on what they get free from nature, on ecosystem services. This is why development models which ignore nature and which ignore ecosystem services really need to be rethought. And we do need a change in paradigm. And I'm delighted that there are at least 2 banks, the IDB and the World Bank, who've sort of noticed this point and are looking at these issues. But frankly, the whole world needs to look at these. When we are talking about development financing, we need to consider what kind of development are we financing if we are destroying the base of livelihoods of the poor and trying to somehow feed in and trickle down from different economic activities into their lives. It may or may not work. True development is about keeping what there is and then adding on health, adding on education, adding on employment opportunity. That rarely happens. In fact, you rarely hear that. What you tend to hear is, why can't we convert these people into something else, transport them to a city? And as I keep pointing out, especially in my country, I come from India, there are 350 million people, as you can see, who depend upon this. And I keep pointing out to our politicians that, you can do what you want, move them to cities or whatever, but what will you do with them in cities? How are you going to have 350 million Ferrari makers in the cities of India? There isn't a need for that many Ferraris, trust me. So these are the realities. And it's about jobs, it's about poverty, it's about the livelihoods of people. You have to recognize reality and build your development models according to that reality. And that's really what's missing right now. And I'm glad that when I say it's missing, I think the point's been made and the point's been taken. And there are changes already which are beginning to be seen.